Hey, welcome everybody to the Andrea Home podcast. This is the third time I'm sitting down with Jesus Sierra after a long break. But I wanted to come back to the podcast because I've had something on my mind recently, and I thought it was something that you could have a interesting conversation with.
Awesome.
So, I've been thinking a lot about how we communicate and how important communication can be. It's become especially important in my life recently as I've started working with a new team. So, communication is super vital. I work remotely, I communicate with a lot of people at work from different departments, and it's made me evaluate the way that I communicate. And I've been trying to come up with strategies in order to become a better communicator.
Mm.
So, my idea today was to have kind of an exploration podcast.
Yes.
So, the idea is that we just share thoughts and ideas, but I'm not aiming to teach anything. I'm not trying to give tips. I just want to talk about what your experience with communication has been and share thoughts.
So this is not going to be like the 5 tips you need to know to be a better communicator type of thing. No.
No, but I do want to pose the question to anybody watching this podcast. Are you a good communicator?
Yeah.
And have you spent time thinking about what being a good communicator means?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me again to your podcast. It's
Thank you
an
for being here.
honor. It's an honor and a privilege to be here for the first. I'm sorry, for the third time. As they say, safety third. So I'm just going to
Safety third?
safety third. That's like a t-shirt type of thing for nerds, like in laboratories, like in labs, meaning usually what you say is safety first, right?
Yeah.
So safety third is a type of t-shirt that like geeks and nerds wear when they're like tinkering with things in a lab, meaning
Implying that
Im-
first and second is like
other,
tinkering.
exactly. So that's how I'm going to approach this safety third. I'm just gonna say whatever I think.
Perfect.
I hope you don't mind.
That's what I'm going for.
Now, I just wanted to say something first. Like I can see you have like different ideas that you would like to explore. Uh, but the first thing that comes to my mind is the fact that you just threw that question into the world. Like, are you a good communicator? I guess for people to ask themselves. I think it's a good start to realize that we are very bad judges of who we are, and we have a very distorted idea of who we are. We think we are something that most likely doesn't really, that really is not the reality. That's a good start. So maybe you think you're a good communicator or a bad communicator, but you might be wrong.
You might not be the best judge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good starting point, in my opinion. So I would invite people. That's the way. When you told me to record this podcast, I thought a little bit about it, and I thought, well, I'm gonna try to approach this conversation with you with a white belt mentality. I'm gonna assume this is square one. I don't know myself,
Hmm.
and I've been thinking um, different different aspects of the way I communicate that I hope we can unfold in this conversation.
I would say that the more time you spend studying communication or thinking about it or learning about different forms of communication, the less ignorant you are about your own capacity to. So I would say that partly in my new job, one of my tasks is to make clear how communication affects your lifestyle and especially in the workplace.
Mm.
And in studying it in depth, I've come to realize maybe certain things that I took for granted that I knew how to do, and really I don't think I was as skillful at those things as I thought I was. And other things that I hadn't even realized existed in communication. So, yeah, now I feel that I don't feel that I know everything there is to know, nor can I be the best judge of my own communication style, but I feel a lot less ignorant on the topic.
Yeah. What have you noticed that you thought you were like a better communicator at that you found you're not?
One thing that I find really interesting is the whole concept of interruptions.
Hmm.
I found it fascinating when I studied that because it's something I've paid attention to before. So I've been working on not interrupting, but I didn't realize also how important it can be to know how to interrupt when you need to. The rules of when interrupting is vital, when it's unnecessary, when it's rude, and also how to do it in a more polite way. And since I've been paying attention to it, I also notice how other people interrupt and how it creates a dynamic in a conversation, how it can make it really hard to talk in certain moments, or how it can facilitate like a continued conversation if people never interrupt. Have you ever thought about interruptions?
Not very much, I have to say. Um, but I wanted to pick on what you just said. But after this process of analyzing how to interrupt and seeing other people uh, in conversations and drawing conclusions, have you would you do you have any idea to share? Like, meaning how to improve for people, how people can improve their interruption skills?
I think knowing when and when not to interrupt was the most useful thing for me. So, what I learned was there are three moments when it's necessary or important to interrupt. One is if you have an important message you have to share. So maybe you have a meeting in 5 minutes and somebody is like going on a long diatribe about something. You have to interrupt and tell them, "I'm so sorry, but I have a meeting in 5 minutes. I'd love to finish this conversation at a later time." Something like that. Another is if you want to share your opinion before moving on to the next topic. So somebody might take it for granted that you're ready to move on, but actually, I want to share my opinion on that previous topic so that we don't have to come back to it later. And what was the third one?
Hmm.
The third one was if you need to ask a question or clarify or yeah, I think those are the three main ones. And then when not to interrupt, is if you just want to jump in with your own personal story, usually that's inappropriate. Like, allow somebody to create their own flow and they might ask you or check in with you. Or if you're just, I mean, a joke could be appropriate if it's the right atmosphere, but a lot of times it's the same thing. It breaks the flow, it takes the attention away from the person who was already on the floor. So there are a lot of times when interruptions are detrimental to the person who's trying to communicate something.
Would you say the approach should be different, whether it's like a business type situation or work situation, or like a more relaxed conversation with friends or with acquaintances?
Yeah, I think you do have to know your audience in a way
Yeah.
because to a certain extent, having studied this has made me realize that in informal situations, I tend to be too quiet. I don't share as much because I continue to let the other person speak and they're kind of expecting you to jump in if you want to tell your own story. It makes you seem a bit cold sometimes, I think.
Yeah. I guess there is also like a cultural thing, right? Like in certain cultures, like we live in Spain, and here, like you have to fight for your for your life in a way. You have to fight to jump in because otherwise, people not only will they not let you talk, but likely they are prone to interrupt you. Is the way people communicate here. It's maybe not wrong or bad, or good or bad, but it is what it is. So if you have a type of personality like yours, that you don't have the tendency to interrupt, you just want to let people finish saying what they are trying to say, it's likely you would never talk. So at some point you have to jump in, right?
Yeah, and that was something that I that stood out to me with a podcast that I listened to. They said that New Yorkers look for a space of like half a second. If there's like a gap in conversation that lasts only half a second, they'll jump in. Whereas somebody from California or maybe somebody from Norway, I would say especially people whose language is not English, if you're communicating in English, they're looking for a longer pause in order to jump in. So depending on where you're from, if it's a big city, if people are tend to be communicating in a rush, you have to be able to jump in a lot faster.
Yeah. It's interesting how like the whole lifestyle affects that, right? Like New York is like a speedy place, and California is like a more chill environment in which people are more relaxed, like, or places like Canada or yeah, Scandinavia. In general, the dynamics are different. People are not so speedy in the way they live. So big cities, everything goes faster.
Yeah, if you think about traffic in the street and imagine that like communication, I would think that most cities communicate at the same speed of traffic of the city.
Yeah.
Although I guess California has a lot of traffic too.
But it moves slowly. Like the 405 is bumper to bumper, right? So it is jammed, but it moves slowly in a way, if you think about it,
Yeah, that's
right?
true. Whereas in New York, you imagine all these taxis pulling in and
Yeah.
out and subways flying through, and it's
Mm,
not the same in California. There's
no.
less mass transit,
Mm.
less more
So
skateboards.
exactly. All right. So the conclusions for you about interrupting after these thoughts, what would it be? Like you have to interrupt, but find the right dynamics, like in the conversation.
Yeah, I would say that ideally the whole world would kind of come to a conclusion that we should interrupt each other less so that people are able to create their own flow. But taking into account that most people don't live that way, I think it's important that you do know how to interrupt in order to have your personality transmit, especially if English is not your first language. I
Yeah.
think it plays a larger role because it's easier to stay mute or silent in the corner.
Yeah. Yeah. If in a way, if you don't interrupt, like if someone with that type of personality don't interrupt and jump in, like in a way, you are depriving the other people in the room or wherever in the Skype call from your ideas. So it's unfair for the other people that you just lay back and don't jump in, right?
Yeah, you could almost see it as laziness.
In a way,
Like
yes.
you have to be firm, you have to be confident and assertive. That's another way we can compare it to traffic. I recently got my Spanish driver license, so
Congratulations, by the way.
thank you. One thing I realized with coming into roundabouts, which I'm not really used to driving with roundabouts in the United States, is you have to be really assertive. Like,
Yeah.
you can't hold back and then wishy washy make your entrance. You have to decide now is the moment, I'm plowing in. So, interruptions are kind of the same way. You have to be firm and confident and assertive when you decide to make your interruption, and then know that you've done so because the message you want to communicate is important, which could lead us into another topic that I want to talk about in terms of communication is the importance of recognizing the moment and the message and the urgency and the formality. In my opinion, there are three main things that you need to make clear in most forms of communication. Let's say text messages or audio messages or interruptions in a meeting or knocking on the door of your manager's office, which is, I think it's important that you clarify how urgent or important the message is. I think it's important that you recognize the formality or the diplomacy or the friendliness required in every interaction of communication. And then, of course, the message that you want to convey.
Okay.
I think a lot of times people speak in a way where they slowly formulate their message as they speak, which is good in informal conversation with friends. But I think most of the time in work situations or in more formal situations, you really have to have clear what what exactly it is you want to communicate so that you can communicate it concisely.
Yeah. Like for example, like imagine like you and I we work together, like we are in the cubicle next like to each other, like you need to tell me like, hey, did you know like the meeting is being canceled? But you peek over and you see that I'm like super concentrated on like typing an email. How would you do that?
Well, I would start there with the fact that I'm interrupting. Because even though you're not speaking, I'm interrupting your work. So I think it's important to start with some sort of friendly formality like, hey, Jesus, sorry to interrupt. I can see that you're working. Um, but this is important. They canceled today's meeting. I don't know, something along those lines.
Yeah. Mhm.
How would you communicate that message?
Uh, well, I think yeah, pretty much the same, I guess. But I would okay. Let me before I go there. What about if like we're not peers? Like you have to communicate that to a third person who is our boss, and it's like this mm, tough type of personality lady that like is very like it can be it is the type of personality that creates some distance with their employees, let's say, or their uh, teammates, as they say now, or other players. Like you're kind of you feel lots of respect in terms of like professional abilities and the situation and hierarchy also. How would you do that? And she's on the phone. She's on the phone. You peek over her office. How would you do that?
Well, honestly, if she was on the phone, unless it needed to be communicated in that moment, I would just like make hold up a finger and make it clear that I'll just come back later because I wouldn't interrupt a phone call of a superior unless it was extremely urgent.
Okay, I want to push this. It's the same situation, but it's very important for her to know that the meeting has been canceled. So she has that type of personality, like it's like, whoa, this lady is not to be messed with. But at the same time, it's very important for her to know what you have to say. So her reaction might be cold, but you still have to do it.
Yeah.
What about in that situation? What would you do?
It's almost the same thing. I would knock, I would open the door, I would say, I'm so sorry for interrupting, but I need to let you know the meeting has been canceled for.
Yeah.
I would pause for a second to see if she had any questions or follow up communication, and then I would discreetly leave.
Hmm.
Would you do it in a different way?
No, that's what I would do. But I think we are both saying, yeah, that's what I would do. But one thing is saying what we would do, and another thing is like walking the walk. You're there, like you're intimidated, but this whole situation, um,
It's
it's
true, and it's something. One of the other things I've been working on is that assertiveness. It's the same thing. It's like jumping into the roundabout. I think it's hard,
yeah,
but the more confident and assertive you are, the better your message will be received by most people in a work environment, I would say.
yes, in a relaxed way, and at the same time,
Y-
determined but relaxed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that I think plays a role here is what I'm calling diplomacy, but it's something I've noticed a lot. I think Americans tend to communicate in a softer way. For example, you would never tell somebody they were fat, like you would say they were big boned. Like that's a very broad example, but it's true. We work around things. We're not very direct communicators, and we try to be more. We use modal verbs. We say can, could, would in order to sound more polite and soft. But it's not very conducive to being assertive and confident. So there's a really fine line between those two things, and I struggle with that. I
Mm,
think that I think that I really appreciate people speaking in kind of a with a bit of formality and with a bit of sweetness. So when I feel people communicating too directly to me, which tends to happen in Spanish culture more, I take a step back. It feels slightly aggressive to me. And also it feels urgent because of that, because by stripping away those diplomatic tendencies that I'm used to or that I resort to, I feel that there's a reason for it, that it must be urgent, that it must be unfriendly, or a mix of the two. And I'm having a hard time finding that line of assertiveness, confidence, and receiving assertive, confident communication, and knowing how to create my own boundaries around it also.
it feels rough in Spanish, no? For English speakers, especially Americans.
Yeah, even the way that you ask for a coffee at a coffee shop.
Yeah,
I would say, could I have, like, please, thank you. And here you just say, ponme un café o algo así, ¿no?
yeah, yeah.
Un café con leche, por favor, ¿no?
Well, the por favor not everybody uses, but yes, it's true. Like for Americans, that's very rough. It's very direct.
I would feel very rude going into a coffee shop and saying, give me a coffee.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so what you're saying is that that creates for you like a psychological frame when you interact with people at work, right? Because this way that people communicate in Spanish or in Spain, I would say, not in Spanish, because in Latin America, I wouldn't say is the case. People are way more polite in Latin America
That's true.
in general, I guess. Uh, so that creates that's a problem for you in a way, right? At work.
It's something I have to take into consideration often. And it's also useful for me to see the opposite because a lot of my students, clients, the people I work with, they have American clients or American bosses or American team members. So the same is true in the opposite sense where they have to learn how to soften their language a bit, and I have to learn how to be more direct or formal or assertive
Yeah.
in order to get respect in a way. So we're
Yeah.
both having trouble receiving the respect from the listener because of this cultural difference, or that's the way I see it.
That's interesting because you said respect, but I could take that even farther. Maybe for some people that's what it is. It elicits like a feeling of well, this person is not to be taken seriously. Maybe some people uh, have that response by you being like polite and soft spoken,
Overly polite
overly
compared to the
polite for
culture.
them, right? But I could also make the case that for a lot of people, it's not only that, or there there could be another mechanism triggering in their heads, which is that they don't even register the message. It's not that they ignore you because they say like, Andrea is, is below me, whatever. But also that because they are like fine tuned to receive a message in a certain way, the fact that you don't deliver the message that way is like it doesn't register. It's like it goes through them without really clicking the right button.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
it could be. It's like too many words to communicate a very short message.
Yes, and the but even beyond that, I would say, even the vehicle that you're using to send the message, it's like, you know what they say, that often people that drive cars in the city, you know how sometimes people riding bicycles, they get mad because drivers in cars ignore them. But often what happens is that when you're driving in a car, you don't see the bike because you're programmed to see cars. So it's not that you saw the bicycle and you didn't give a shit. It's that you really, your brain didn't see it.
Hmm.
So that's kind of what I mean. It could be happening here also. Like if they are interacting with other Spanish speakers and they're like, "Hey, un café. Hey, this, that. I need the paper for tomorrow," or whatever. If you jump in and you say like, "Hey, excuse me, do you think it would be possible that?" No, I'm serious. It's like it doesn't register. It's like, well, why? It's like they're listening to some untuned message from the space. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So I wonder if there is also a component of that, or there could be.
yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So you have to, yeah, adapt to that in a way, and wear one of those fluorescent vests when you ride your bike.
When you ride your bike and when you communicate.
Yeah, you have to adapt, right?
I think in that sense, when it's something urgent, it really needs to be communicated from the beginning so
Yeah.
that the person is aware of how much attention span they should be
Yeah.
giving to this message.
Mm. What's your preferred way of communicating at work? Like, if you need to communicate with someone, do you use email? Do you use other platforms? Do you call? Do you send like a text message? What do you do?
In my work environment, we use Slack. So
Slack?
it's kind of like text messages on a different platform. And you could send audio messages, or in my work environment, we also use Loom, like video with slideshows. So you could send audio, you could send video, or you could send short or long text messages. I prefer like mid length text messages. I prefer to use written communication, and it's how I prefer to receive communication. But I recognize that in a lot of ways it's not ideal. I think I think a lot of my managers or my boss, they prefer audio messages because it means you get a break from the computer screen.
Yeah.
So you can listen to you can people can communicate things to you while you're out walking, while you're exercising, which is awesome. It's true. We've had team meetings in which everybody sent their own little clip via audio, and it was such a nice break from the computer screen. But it's a method I don't that I have more trouble with because I think I can be more concise and more eloquent in written form than I can in spoken form.
But isn't it true that um, uh, typing, you said mid length? What is that, like 200 words, 100 words?
Yeah, I would say
Doesn't
around
it
there.
take longer to type than to record 100-word spoken message?
It takes longer to type, but if I'm communicating to somebody else, I'm thinking about the message they're receiving. So if I make an audio message, it might take me longer to clarify exactly what I want to say, to get straight to the point. I might mumble my words a little bit or go on too long. And if I were to do that in a text message, I would delete what I realized wasn't that important and I would cut it down to just the essential message so that they could read it and get the important information as quickly as possible, or in what I think is as quickly as possible. And I've noticed that when other people send me audio messages, it can go on for so long. and I don't know from the beginning how urgent it is. I can't go back and refer to it later. I can't scan through it and pick out what I think is most important. So I think that it demands a lot from the receiver
Yeah.
when you send an audio message. Maybe not if you're out walking the dog or if you're exercising at the same time.
Yeah.
But that also means you don't get a break.
But maybe it boils down also to how bad the sender is about sending spoken messages. Uh, because I think you can send a very precise, concise message to the point, saying specifically what you want to communicate, or um, sending the clear idea of what you want the recipient to do. I think
Yes,
it's just as people are in general, I find that statistically, in general, I find people are not very good communicators, spoken communicators.
it's true. And maybe the reason that I prefer written is because I'm still trying to improve my spoken communication. When I make videos, is this wind
It's windy. It's
noisy?
okay. No, it's okay. We can go on here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it won't pick up. If it gets worse, we can move inside.
Okay. Um I think that I'm aware that I need to improve my spoken communication to be more concise. I think it works great with friends
Mm.
in informal environments because I'm able to show my personality in longer conversations. But when I have to be very concise and straight to the point and maybe slightly aggressive, formal, assertive, I have more trouble.
Yeah, but it's what you said before. Also, like if I send you a if we were to work together and I wanted to send you a message, I think what happens often is that people just start recording and trying to unfold the details of their idea as they speak instead of thinking before, okay, I need to ask Andrea to do this, this, and this. I need it with this level of urgency, and this is the time frame in which I need Andrea to act upon this. And I have to say that like in 30 seconds. Hey, Andrea, listen, about the project this and this and that, there has been a problem with this thing. Do you think you could do this? We would need it for Friday. If you don't, let me know, right?
Hope you're having a good day.
Well, that was, yes, of course. Hope you're having a good day. And yes,
Talk to you soon.
yeah, yeah. And also, like, I would try to do it in a way that minimizes the exchange. Like, I would try to anticipate what you might need to know before. So it's like, hey, Andrea, can you do this for tomorrow? If I don't say the level of or if I don't say the level of urgency, you need to ask me, well, how important it is because I have this other project for tomorrow. But if I tell you
Exactly.
like it's extremely important, like I'm minimizing the need for different other exchanges that I just planted a seed
Yeah,
upon.
and that's something I've noticed lately at work too is a lot of the messages I give or receive are misinterpreted by the other person. So
Exactly.
if somebody asks you for something or needs something from you, there have been a lot of moments where I misunderstood. I did the wrong thing or I had to say, what do you mean by that? Is it this or is it this? And it's true. By the time they receive that message, then they respond to it and then I receive that message. I can no longer do the thing you want me to do immediately. Time passes, maybe now you're in a meeting, maybe later I'm at lunch. So, if you're able to clarify all of the information concisely and perceive what the other person needs to know ahead of time, I think again it shows a lot more respect towards the receiver.
Exactly. And it saves a lot of time in the long run for the company or or is more efficient just in life, even if it's just like something that is not directly related to work, but even if it's, like you are you have planned to play tennis tomorrow with a friend and there's a problem coming up, instead of having to send three messages, you can solve that with one if you're very precise, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we undervalue, or that is super important today, in life today, but people over exaggerate technical skills and things like that in their work environment, or even as like their own capacity.
What do you mean? Exaggerate technical skills?
It's easy to think that you got your what you have to offer a job or a project or something is all based on your technical skills.
Mm.
Especially now that I'm working with software developers, there's a whole wealth of technical skills involved there that are super important. But communication, communicating, I
Shh, calla, anda.
the capacity to communicate your ideas and work with a team and brainstorm and come up with things, all of those communication capacities play a huge role in how important you are to a company or what you have to offer a project. And I think we tend to overlook that.
Yeah.
And it's something I'm really recognizing in my current job. We call it agile communication, like being able to be agile in how you communicate.
Mm. That's interesting. Like, not only at work, I would say in everything. It's not only the skills you have or what you know, it's how much of what you know or can do or your skills can you deploy, right? It's like, yeah, you have lots of gasoline in the tank, but if you don't you don't find the good way to utilize that gas, it doesn't matter. It's how much you can deploy from what you know. We see this a lot, like in whatever, like sport instructors, right? Like the best ski instructor is not the one who skis the best, is the one who, with what he knows, can convey it. This is the same thing. Like the best developer is not the one who can code the better whatever program or whatever. Is
Mm-hmm.
the one who understand what the client who understands what the client wants
Mm-hmm.
and deploy that. Like, is way more important, right?
Yes,
And obviously, the excellent one is the one who has lots of skills, understands well, communicates well, and then it's like, woo, the sky's the limit,
it's true.
right?
How attuned you are to what the listener needs from you. And in a way, having empathy for the user, the listener, the receiver, in order to identify the best strategies to use when you communicate with them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something that I'm trying to learn more and more about. Like um, UX designers, user experience designers, it's the same thing. You're communicating through images or through videos or through memes, but you're trying to understand the viewer, the person accessing your web page or your app. You're trying to understand what message gets across to them the best way.
Yeah,
It's you can apply that to
everything.
spoken communication or
Mm.
text. What do you think about emojis? That was one more thing I wanted to bring up.
Ooh,
Like, are
that's
they
in,
appropriate in work environments
I like
or?
them. I like them. I think I don't use them as much, maybe, but I have nothing against them intellectually. I think it's going back to the origins of communication, you know? Um, and I think, well, who knows, but it's likely that in the future we're going to see way more of that.
Hmm, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you have problem with using um, emojis at work?
No, in at my work environment, there I would say there people recognize the importance of them,
Yeah.
and I love it because I think facial expressions are a huge part of how I
Yes.
communicate, or body language, and I think that's even more crucial when you're communicating in another language. So when I speak in Spanish, I tend to use my hands more. I tend to rely more on my facial expressions. And I think it's super useful to be able to add that into your text communication.
It's true that text communication can be very cold. Like until Elon Musk's Elon Musk succeed in taking language out of the equation, like my idea from my neocortex jumps in, like lands into your neocortex. In the meantime, it's like language if it's spoken and written form. But the written form, in my view, is poorer, obviously, than spoken language. Um, it can be better for being like forcing ourselves, as you were saying before, to be concise and very specific, but we lose the non-verbal communication part. So when we send a message, a short, like if you write me an email and I respond like, "Hey Andrea, thank you, bye." I'm in my mind, I might be thinking like, "Thank you, Andrea, bye." But maybe when you receive that email, you're having a bad day and you read that as "Thank you, Andrea, bye."
Yeah, it's true.
Right?
And
So
a little emoji can
an
help a lot.
emoji can do magic. Yeah,
Yes, it's true.
it does do magic.
To me, I read messages completely differently depending on the emoji. Like, if you say thank you and there's those two hands going up in the air,
Yeah,
like, oh, praise. It's so interesting, but it does. It feels as if somebody is physically making that gesture.
of course.
And I tend to stay away from the pleading hands, like the praying hand
Okay.
image, because I think it feels a bit desperate. So when I'm asking somebody a favor, maybe I show like fingers crossed or like a hopeful facial expression, but I don't like the pleading hands because it just feels too desperate to
Yeah,
me.
if it's needy, you know?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Needy elicits bad reaction in humans, despite what we might think. Neediness is bad.
I recently read an article that said that told me what the most popular emoji is. Do you know which one it
No, I
is?
have no idea. Which one is it?
It's the laughing with tears of joy face.
Hmm.
The the one where there's two tears coming out the sides, but it's not crooked, it's straightforward. That's the most popular emoji, I think. It has been for several years now.
Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting. So, any more ideas to explore?
I wanted to say one more thing.
Okay.
This is something I know you have an opinion on, so I would love it if you would share your
I have
opinion.
opinions on a lot of things. Sorry.
What is your thought on multi communicating or being distracted when communicating?
I think that's the worst thing that has happened to humanity. In the
There's that opinion I was
this
talking about.
over the past 20 years. Yeah, I think it's very um, it can be bad for a lot of things. It can be terrible. I think it erodes many good things of life. It can erode productivity, can erode relationships, can erode your your own well-being. It can erode your relationship with your partner. It can erode so many things. I think multitasking is one of the worst things that can happen to people. I know there are a lot of people out there that disagree with me in this. Like they see that as a trait of the times we live in, and it's just not good or bad. It is what it is. Blah blah blah. I understand that approach, but I really choose to go the other route, totally opposite. I think um, multitasking in itself doesn't exist. It's task switching.
Hmm.
It's like we can only do one thing at the same time, and you can feel it. For example, I do pay a lot of attention to that. It's so clear to me if I'm talking on the phone with someone, or even or clearly, like physically talking to this to somebody. I can feel that they are not paying full attention to me. It's so clear. And even on the phone, in the phone I feel it. Like I can see them like responding to text messages at the same time. I can feel that they're devoting only 30% of my attention to me.
Hmm.
So that erodes their relationship with me, and this for me, that erodes their productivity. The person, probably that same person that is talking to me on the phone, is being very productive because he's talking to me while responding a text message to his girlfriend, whatever, and at the same time doing something else. It's probably not reading that WhatsApp message with attention either. So it's responding to a text message that he didn't actually read thoroughly, assuming things, taking things for granted just because he scanned some words like dinner tonight, 8, but he didn't really read the message like my aunt is here, whatever.
Yeah.
And then is when miscommunication happens. Oh, I thought you said, you know. So I'm happy. The person receiving that text message isn't happy. Everybody's unhappy. So like, shut the fucking phone. Talk to me, or or don't talk to me, or don't pick up the phone. Respond to the message, and then you talk to me. And it seems like if you do that, you're doing less stuff. It seems, but it's not true. You're doing more.
You're just being more selective about which thing you're doing and when.
Yes, that's the way I feel it, and um, that's the way I do it, and that's the way I like people that I interact with act. I tend to walk away from or minimize my interactions with people that multitask a lot because it feels unreal. I'd rather be by myself.
By with people who multitask a lot, you mean somebody who, when you're speaking with them, they might answer the phone or respond to a text message or something like that? Or somebody who cooks lunch while having a phone conversation with you? Are those in the same category?
No, not to me. That's different. Because one thing is where you're doing automatically. Like you don't need attention for that. If you're cooking, well, unless you're a cook and you really take that as a some serious endeavor. But otherwise, it's like some mechanical thing you're doing. To me, that's not multitasking. I do that. I could perfectly be cooking and listening to a podcast or talking on the phone. Well, maybe talking on the phone is borderline, but yeah, probably I would. But what I mean is like we've seen this, right? Like someone at an office, like he's like having a chat on the computer screen while um, doing some work on the screen also
Yeah.
and listening to the radio. I don't know. There's no way you can excel at any of those three things. There's no way.
Yeah.
So I think we have the perception that productivity is higher, but in the long run, I doubt it. I doubt that is the case.
Or at least you're presenting yourself in a lesser version. So if I'm not giving you my full attention, it's as if I only have this much attention in me, or
Yes.
I'm only capable of understanding you to this degree. So it kind of diminishes your intelligence or your kindness as a person.
Yes. And the way, and then if we go into the emotional response we have when we interact with those people, like I'm sure this has happened to you. Like happens to me all the time. Like you go meet someone, and it's like talking on the phone. It's like, wait a minute, or answers the phone while with you. So wait a minute. So I made the effort to come here. I made the effort to make the time. We're having a chat, talking about things, and then someone who didn't make the effort calls you, and you prioritize this person um,
Above,
above me. How does this work? What message do I get from that? Because what I read is
I'm at the bottom of the totem pole.
it doesn't matter if you make the effort to come here, and it doesn't matter if I put my phone on airplane mode. So okay, like you would. you can do this to me once, but over time, I'm going to minimize interactions with you inevitably.
Mm, mm.
And to me, that relates to multitasking because, in a way, it's a way of multitasking too. It's multitasking in our social interactions.
It's prioritizing something above or at the same plane as the person who's physically there or speaking to you or
Yes. And maybe for some people, it's just a weakness of personality, if I may say, because they want to please everybody. So they want to please the person who called on the phone, they want to please me, they want to please everybody. Maybe that's the case for some people. They just cannot not respond. Some people just cannot. But in the end, you want to please everybody and you please nobody, likely.
yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, that's my thought.
Is there anything else you want to bring up in terms of
Not specifically. Now that I have the floor,
yeah,
I would encourage people to try to be more precise in their communications.
it's something that you feel strongly about?
Well, because I would benefit personally if everybody pays more attention to that. I gained also. So before you send an email, before you send a text, before you send an audio message, just give it 15 seconds to think about it. What do you want to say? What is the time frame? And what is the level of urgency? As you were saying, I'm picking this up from what you said before, but it's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Like think before you ink.
And what the last part I added to that was the formality. Because it's something that's different across cultures too, is to like do you start with a hey, how's it going? Is that too wishy-washy? Are you not should you is it better to get directly to the message, or is it showing kindness and concern to actually make the effort to ask about the other person? Would you include that in those 15 seconds of
I would, but I do have to say that that would depend on the also that's also part of the message or and the unconscious vibe of the message. So if it's very urgent and I need you to act upon something, I wouldn't say like, "Hey Andrea, how are you?" I wouldn't say that, obviously. You
yeah.
know. So, for example, if that were to be the case, I would say like, "Hi Andrea, this is very important." Boom, and then I would say it.
Mhm.
So first of all, that I will catch your attention. Like you read that at the top of the text, and it's like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
So it puts you already in the mood that I need you to be to read the message. And I would probably, if you are one of not you, but if the receiver is the type of person that tends to multitask and be doing a lot of things, at least with that, I'm like putting a red flag on the phone. Like, okay, this is important. You know,
Yeah, that's true.
those are my thoughts.
Great. I think that was a thorough investigation of communication, which is what I was hoping for.
It was fun. It was fun. I love this format. So
Me
thank you
too.
for inviting me again. It's
Thank you
awesome.
for being here.
So are we gonna do like a part two communication conversation podcast or
Yeah, it's likely.
cool?
I like picking your brain on these topics.
Cool. It's fun. Thank you for inviting me over again.
Thanks for being here.